So just imagine for a second, you're walking down the hallways of your school and you accidentally bump into some kid, and when you go say sorry, the kid turns to you and says, "I'm actually a werewolf," and tries to consume you whole. Not the most normal day, but that is today's story time, so sit back, relax, subscribe if you're new, leave a like for your free nothing, and let's jump in today's story. So we're going to call the subscriber who submitted today's story Clayton. So anyways, this story all started one day when Clayton was walking down the halls of his school. And he accidentally bumps into this kind of weird kid that he didn't really know that well, but this kid always has acted kind of weird. And so Clayton bumped into him by accident because I think Clayton just wasn't paying attention. And obviously the werewolf kid, I mean, he's the werewolf kid, by the way, but Clayton doesn't know this yet. The werewolf kid also wasn't paying attention. That's how you bump into someone. You're both not paying attention. I always find it lame when like one person's like, "You should watch where you're going," when obviously, bro, you should have watched where you're going as well. But anyways, Clayton bumps into the werewolf kid. Is like, "Sorry, dude." And werewolf kid is like, "What did you say to me?" And Clayton's like, sorry. He's like, "You have been very disrespectful with that." Big piles of drool just coming out of his mouth. And Clayton's like, my fault, bro. Like, sorry, I guess. And the werewolf kid is like, "You don't know who you just messed with, buddy." And the werewolf kid like scuffles away. And Clayton's just like, that was the weirdest interaction I've ever had in my life. But also, I'm not necessarily surprised since this kid had a bit of a reputation for being weird. He didn't have a reputation for being an actual werewolf, or in his own eyes, but yeah, so things, Clayton really didn't think anything of this interaction for a while, but let me just say that this interaction, Clayton accidentally bumping into the werewolf kid, would spark one of the craziest chain of events that Clayton has ever experienced. Actually, probably the craziest chain of events that Clayton has ever experienced. Because by the end of the day, Clayton had already forgotten about bumping into the werewolf kid because, I don't know, man, there's just other important things going on in Clayton's life. He doesn't think about every second of the day. Like, I don't know, it just wasn't a big deal. Like, it was, sure enough, it was a weird interaction. And after the fact, Clayton thinks back to it all the time. But before anything weird happened, why would he care? So anyways, Clayton is walking back home. And that is when he sees the werewolf kid. Okay, at this point, we're going to call him the werewolf kid, even though Clayton doesn't know that this is the werewolf kid. He just thinks it's the weird kid. But since we know, we're just going to call him the werewolf kid from this point on. But Clayton can see that the werewolf kid is like following him back home. And it's weird because Clayton always walks back from school. He walks to and from school. And Clayton lived like 10 minutes away, so not a far walk. But he also knew that the werewolf kid did not live near him. Or the werewolf kid would walk home, but would walk in the other direction, right? So it was weird because the werewolf kid would like walk behind him, and when Clayton would turn around, the werewolf kid would like literally jump into the bushes. He would like belly flop into like the nearest thing. And like one time he accidentally like belly flopped into a fence and like fell on the ground and was like, "Ow, ow." So yeah, Clayton was like, okay, this is like really strange. This is really weird, but whatever. So Clayton goes all the way back home. When Clayton goes back home, goes into his house and hides out in the kitchen and looks through the window, and sure enough, he sees the werewolf kid walking around, eventually makes it to where his house is, and the werewolf kid takes out his phone and starts like recording all around just to like figure out where he was, right? And yeah, so Clayton's like, "Oh, geez, like this kid," like, because now Clayton's like, "Oh yeah, this is the kid I bumped into. Like, I know he's the weird kid, but like he said," because Clayton started to remember, "Oh, wait, this kid was saying you're going to regret disrespecting me," or whatever he said, right? And Clayton's like, crap, like, I really have to deal with this now. So the werewolf kid is like just going around recording his entire house. I don't know what he was doing. Maybe he was like, I don't even know, dude. So Clayton walks out because he's like, I'm going to deal with this kid. He's like, "Hello." And the werewolf kid looks at him and goes, "Oh," and then runs away. And Clayton's like, "What?" Yeah, so... remember at this point, the Clayton doesn't know that this kid is actually the werewolf kid, right? Who thinks he's actually a werewolf and will consume you if you disrespect him. So all he knows is just some like strange kid who bumped into him and he was like got all mad and then has followed him home and has recorded his house with like his phone or whatever he was doing. And then when Clayton walked out and was like, "Bro, what are you doing?" howls at him, and then scurries away. Like, Clayton is just like, "Bro, I really go to the worst school ever. This is probably the most normal school in Ohio, but Clayton did live in Ohio, so this was the strangest thing that ever happened. Like, it makes no sense. Clayton lived in Nebraska. He doesn't live in Ohio, bro. Why is this happening right now? So, sure enough, right, Clayton's like, all right, man, I know for a fact I got to deal with this nonsense now. So Clayton finishes up his homework early, as he does every single night, because every single night he hops on, I don't know, Fortnite or Xbox or Minecraft, or he's playing some video game with his friends, and he's in his room. He always finishes his homework early so he can hop on the video games with the boys. And this night was no different, so he hops on, he's playing whatever, and it's around 8:30 at night or whatever, and that's when he hears the strangest sound coming from outside. He hears, oh, and not just one person. He hears like 6 howling wolves, right? So he's like, what the hell, bro? So he gets up, walks down to the kitchen, and looks outside. And his mom and dad are standing in the kitchen, and they look at him. They're like, hey, Clayton, you're supposed to tell us if you have friends over. And Clayton's like, what? I don't have friends over. And then they point outside. It is the werewolf kid and then 2 of his, like, weird friends. Like, one friend has, like, his head is completely shaven on one side and the other side is super, super long and it's dyed dark black. It's basically, like, emo werewolf kids, right? They're all in the back. They're on all fours and they're like, oh, they're all, like, howling or whatever. And at this point, oh, my God, like, Clayton is just like, oh, my God, I have to deal with this. So Clayton explains, okay, see that kid over there, and points to the kid in the middle, which is the werewolf kid, not his like emo werewolf kid friends. So the kid, and he's just like, the kid in the middle, I bumped into him earlier today and he starts yelling at me and I'm like, I'm sorry. And then he followed me home and then he took all these videos of her house and it was super weird. And then I don't know. And he howled at me and ran away. And now he's outside with his weird friends howling at my house or whatever. I don't know what to do. And, Clayton's mom and dad kind of look at each other and they're like, okay, well, this situation doesn't seem that serious. So we're going to let you handle it or you figure out what you want to do about this. But if your buddies out there are still howling after 9:30, like, we're going to come down and deal with it. And Clayton in his mind is like, these are not my buddies. Stop saying that these are my buddies. These are not my buddies. Stop it. But anyways, right? So eventually Clayton walks outside. He's like, guys, what is this? And the 3 emo vampire werewolf dudes or whatever, they're all sitting there on all fours doing their little vampire, or not vampire, their little werewolf howls. And then they look at him. And the main kid in the center is like, werewolves scatter. And then they all run away. And, at this point, Clayton yells at them like, what are you? And then by that time, they're gone. So Clayton hops back on his game and his friends are like, dude, like, why'd you hop off? He's like, I don't know if you're going to believe this, but these emo vampire cringy kids at my school followed me back home and were howling at my house because I bumped into one of them on accident. And the friends were like, okay, no, seriously, why did you hop off? And Clayton's like, no, seriously. His friends were like, dude, what? So anyways, a couple days go by. And so the thing is, Clayton has class with one of the emo werewolf kids. However, the emo werewolf kid never shows up to class. He only shows up to class like once a week. And he's like failing everything because he's too busy practicing his werewolf tactics and strategies or whatever he's doing with his life, which is probably not that much. But anyways, right, so sure enough, he goes into class and he hears nothing from the werewolf kids anymore. So for a little bit, Clayton's like, oh, sick. Like, I don't have to deal with these kids anymore. We're good. Yeah, but that was very far from being true because, in fact, he did still have to deal with the emo vampire werewolf kids or whatever. Because that weekend, there's kind of like a local mall that they all go to. It's like, it's a pretty fun spot to go or whatever, right? And so sure enough, basically, Clayton and his friends went to the mall, and they were kind of just like, I don't know, they just like hang out there, dude. So most of the time they wouldn't even buy anything. It was just like a spot to go to. It was just like a spot to hang out at. So they're hanging out at the mall, and that's when Clayton, who's completely forgotten, well, not completely forgotten, but the emo vampire kids or whatever are just not at the top of his mind. But that's when he sees the werewolf kid and the other 2 werewolf kids walking around, and they have like all black on, and some of them have like tails or whatever, like the furry tail things, because they are actually werewolves, guys. And one of them has like claw furry paw things to be like werewolf paws or whatever. And one of them has like a Twilight shirt on, which is like the werewolf. What? I don't even know, dude. Just imagine that, right? So at this point, Clayton's like, oh, guys, because these are the guys he plays games with. The people that Clayton plays games with live near him, but they don't go to the same school as him. So they'll like play video games on the weekdays, and then they'll get together on the weekends. He's like, dude, like, look over there. And they all look at like the emo werewolf kids or whatever. And he's like, dude, those are the kids, bro, that showed up in my yard last night and were like howling at like my house or whatever. And his friends are like, there's no way. Like, and then they look closer and then they're like, actually, no. I could totally see those kids doing that. Yeah, no, I actually do believe you here. And that's when the werewolf kid, the main one, makes eye contact with Clayton. And Clayton makes eye contact back. And that's when Clayton whispers to his friends, boys, we got a problem. I just made eye contact with that kid. And immediately the pack of werewolf kids, right, they were going in one direction. They immediately turn and start heading right towards where Clayton and his friends are. And Clayton and his friends are like, dude, we don't want to have to deal with that. And Clayton's like, all right, come with me. So Clayton and his friends, they start beelining it down the hall. Like they just start going straight down the hall, right? And they're kind of like power walking. And that's when Clayton turns behind to see that the werewolf kids have gained a ton of ground because they are running towards him. And okay, no disrespect, but a little disrespect. These the werewolf kids are not the most muscular, athletic specimens on planet Earth. So when I'm saying that they're running towards him, they're basically walking, but just like a little faster than walking. Their equivalent of running is basically like the equivalent of someone speed walking. But either way, they were gaining ground, right? So immediately, like, at this point, Clayton's like, all right, guys, like, we gotta hide. And they're like, oh, my God. Clayton's friends were not trying to deal with emo, vampire, werewolf, Twilight stands. I don't even know at this point. Sure enough, they run into, like, this clothing store. They find towards the back of the store, there's a lot of clothing racks. And they literally just jump into one of the clothing racks. And, like, the clothes go down, so, like, you can't really see the legs of them. Like, I think if you looked really closely, you could see Clayton and his friends' legs, but they ran into like this clothing store and hid behind one of the racks or stalls or whatever, and they're just standing there. And Clayton kind of has a little bit of a view, and he sees the werewolf kid and his friends walk into the store. And Clayton's like, oh, crap. Because Clayton was hoping that they would have like not noticed, because they went around a corner and then went into a store, so it wasn't super obvious, but apparently the werewolf kids were close enough behind that they must have seen them to make a turn, or they just realized that, they must have turned into one of the stores because Clayton and his friends kind of disappeared really quickly. So sure enough, the werewolf kids are walking around the store, and they're trying to like emphasize how they're sniffing. So they're making really loud sniffing sounds, even though very obviously they do not have enhanced smell abilities because they're actually werewolves. Like, I think pretty obviously that's just not the case. However, right, they're LARPing as werewolves, bro. They're going to be like, my werewolf senses tell me that they're in this direction or something like that when they literally just see them, right? So, the werewolf kids are walking all around the store. And at this point, Clayton kind of just comes to the conclusion that they're going to get caught eventually. So that's when the main werewolf kid, the one who started it all, is like walking around and then stops right next to them. So they're all behind this clothing rack, right? And the clothes go really far down. I don't know, it must be pants or something long, right? So it's not super obvious, but if he paid, like, if this kid turns and looks, he would see Clayton and his friends hiding behind the clothing rack. Like, if this kid just looked, he would see it. And so this kid is looking, and he stops right where Clayton and his friends are. So the werewolf kid is like, he's making this like sniffing sound, and Clayton's like, oh, dude, just get it over with. And with that, the werewolf kid moves right past them and is like, guys, my werewolf senses are saying that they're actually in the store across from us. Oh, and then they all all the werewolf kids leave the store and they go to the next store, which kind of just tells you that their werewolf senses are not that great, since the kid was literally 2 feet away from Clayton and his friends. And he said his werewolf senses actually said that they were in the other store, which I don't know, man. It's not like the werewolf senses were actually real in the first place, but I just find that kind of funny. Yeah, but sure enough, right, Clayton and his friends, they get out of like the clothing rack, they leave the store, and then they immediately exit the mall. And once they've left the mall, Clayton's friends are like, dude, you gotta deal with those kids. Like, we like hanging, like, we enjoy hanging out with you, bro. And, like, we're good on games, but we don't want to have to worry every single time we come to the mall that, you know, these kids are gonna come after us. And Clayton's like, yes, I 100% agree. I will do something about it. Don't worry. So anyways, Monday, Clayton gets into school and he's thinking about like, okay, do I find this kid and like play into his little games and be like, I'm so scared of you werewolf people. Please let me be. Can I give you like, I don't know, $1 to let me go? That's all I have. I don't know. Like Clayton was kind of thinking of like, I don't know, pretending to be super scared of them and being like begging or whatever. And I don't even know. He was trying to just figure out a way to get them off his back because they weren't actually like a threat or anything, but they were just damn annoying, bro. The werewolf people. Secret word of the day is people. If you made it this far into the video, comment people down below. And while you're down there in the comment section commenting people, check the pinned comment as there's a link to my Spotify page, which you can listen to all these stories on Spotify. And also a link to my 2 other channels, a meme channel and a Reddit storytime channel. I would love it if you could subscribe to both those channels with notifications on, because I really think you like the videos on there, and subscribing now helps a lot as they're small and just growing. Anyways, right, so sure enough, he's just like, I'll deal with it when it comes. But so Clayton enters his 3rd period class. And remember, Clayton had a class with one of the werewolf kids. In fact, the OG werewolf kid. But this kid never showed up to class because he was too busy practicing spells, being emo, and howling at the full moon, right? He was too busy being a werewolf kid. But today, he actually shows up. And I think the werewolf kid didn't even realize that Clayton was in his class. Because Clayton and the werewolf kid, they make eye contact, and they just stare at each other. Both of them look extremely shocked. The werewolf kid probably looked shocked because he totally forgot that, you know, Clayton was in this class. Because remember, the werewolf kid probably didn't even know who Clayton was until he bumped into him one day, and he decided that him and the werewolf gang were going to have a crusade against him. And Clayton was completely shocked because he did know the werewolf kid was in this class, but this kid literally never showed up to class. Like, the werewolf kid never showed up to class ever, probably had a negative 0% in the class. Like, at this point, they were both shocked. And so Clayton sits towards the front of the class as the werewolf kid was in the very, very back of the class. And Clayton thought, I don't know, if I sit far away from him, what's the worst thing he can do? Those are famous last words. And Clayton learned that he did not need to be sitting right next to the werewolf kid for the werewolf kid to try and do something insane in class. So anyways, the teacher starts teaching class, and Clayton, like, drops his pencil. So when he drops his pencil, he goes down to pick it up, as one would. So when he's going down to pick up his pencil, he kind of looks behind him a little bit, because he's just kind of curious where the werewolf kid is. And, dude, Clayton thought he was, like, seeing things wrong. Because the werewolf kid was no longer in the back of the class. Okay, there was a lot of empty desks in this class. There was probably about 50 desks and 30 students. So they were all kind of spread out. So there's a lot of empty desks, right? Because I think this class, 30 kids is kind of small for Clayton School, but it would go up to 50. Like, there are classes in this room who fill up all 50 seats. But when Clayton turns behind him, the werewolf kid, who used to be in the very, 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 very back row, was now in the back row, but not the very back row. He had, like, moved up 3 rows or something. And Clayton's like, okay, I'm just seeing things, or I'm remembering wrong, because Clayton remembered this kid was in the back, but Clayton's like, okay, I must have just thought to myself that he was in the way back when he's actually, like, a couple rows back front from the way back, right? So Clayton, feeling a little weird, because he knew that he did not remember wrong. So Clayton decides to turn back again. And when Clayton turns back again, the werewolf kid is literally halfway from the front. So instead of being all the way in the back, he's now halfway from the front, meaning he's moved up like 5 rows. And at this point, Clayton knows for a fact that the werewolf kid is slowly moving up rows. So Clayton is like, okay, this feels like freaking Five Nights at Freddy's. Every time I, like, shine the flashlight, they don't move. But every time I turn away, they get closer. Like, this is terrifying, dude. So sure enough, Clayton is kind of just, like, freaking out a little bit, because while he's not necessarily scared of the werewolf kid, he's just like, what is this kid going to do? This is going to be so embarrassing. This is going to be so annoying. Like, why does this kid need to do this, bro? Like, oh my God. kind of stuff along those lines. And yeah, so sure enough, the werewolf kid is getting closer and closer until like Clayton turns around and the werewolf kid is one seat behind him, staring right at him. And Clayton like jumps in his chair. He's like, Jesus. And kind of looks at the werewolf kid, kind of gives him a look of like, what? And the werewolf kid is just smiling at him maniacally. And Clayton gets like low-key a little bit actually scared for a second, dude. He's like, like what, bro? Like, okay, now chill, relax. So he's like, okay, what actually can the werewolf kid do to me? Clayton's just sitting there thinking, okay, I'm fine, you're good. What can this kid actually do to me? And that's when he hears the werewolf kid whisper, this is for you disrespecting the werewolves. And after hearing that, bro, like Clayton in his head is like, oh no, because he knows something is coming. And that's when the werewolf kid literally goes, rah! And like jumps out of his chair and tackles Clayton onto the ground. And the teacher's yelling like, werewolf kid, says his actual name. Let's call him Ben. He's like, Ben, what are you doing to Clayton right now? And the werewolf kid, Ben, literally starts like biting Clayton's upper thigh, bro. Like low-key sus, but biting his upper thigh. And Clayton's like, get off of me. Doesn't actually bite that well because he's like not an actual freaking werewolf, bro. But he's like gnawing on his upper thigh. Sus, once again. Hey, he's venting, bro. But anyways, yeah, so he's like, get off of me. And Clayton like kicks him off. And he like falls over or whatever, and he's like, oh, woo, woo. He starts like howling at Clayton in the middle of math class, bro. And everyone else in the class is just staring at them. And that's when the teacher runs over, picks up the werewolf kid, and it's like, come with me. What are you doing in my class? And literally runs the kid out of class. And so Clayton gets up, turns the rest of the class, and said, I had nothing to do with that. I'm as confused as you, and sits right down.